week, two Republicans who have challenged President Trump in the 2020 GOP primary will participate in a debate with Business Insider today. Former Congressman Joe Walsh of Illinois and Massachusetts former Governor Bill Weld are just two of the president's challengers. Congressman Mark Sanford and the president declined to participate in that debate.
A new poll by economists and YouGov shows that while the president has a commanding lead over all of his Republican challengers, of his three opponents, Governor Weld has the most support. He joins us now to talk about his campaign, the upcoming debate, and why he's challenging the president. Governor, welcome.
Thank you, Inez.
Thanks for being here, sir.
Thanks for being here. Well, I'll start with the kind of downer question here. You ran on the Libertarian ticket in 2016. You garnered less than 1% of the vote, which was a good showing for the Libertarian Party, but nevertheless, Republican favorability for Trump is anywhere from 89 to 94% within the party. Previous challenges to incumbents within either party are usually launched when the president within his own party is somewhere around 50% approval rating or even worse. And nobody's actually pulled it off for 130 years, challenging and winning against an incumbent president in a primary. So how do you plan to overcome those numbers?
Well, first of all, history is not exactly on the president's side. All 5 times that an incumbent president running for re-election has faced a primary challenge, that president has either withdrawn or lost. That's in the last 50 years. So that's number one. Number two, I think the polls that show the president very popular among the Republican state committees and inveterate Republican voters, that's a pretty tight screen. And my job, particularly in the 20 states that allow crossover voting, so independents and Democrats can vote in the Republican primary, my job is to enlarge that electorate. So there are more millennials, more women voting. It's a broader electorate than before. Sometimes you get the feeling that Republicans, particularly in areas with large minority populations, are interested in suppressing the vote. I'm interested in expanding the vote, and that's my path to victory.
And do you believe, is your goal to win, or is your goal to damage the president?
My goal is to win. I'm a 2-term governor. I've hung around the Oval Office in the White House for a couple of decades almost, both Bushes and Clinton. So I really know the drill. I'm comfortable in my own skin. I know what I think about everything, international as well as domestic. So I can do the job starting Monday. Having said that, I know your next question. If I contributed to Mr. Trump not getting reelected, would that be winning? The answer is it would be a solid achievement that I would be proud to have done, but it wouldn't be winning.
Gotcha. And which states do you find are most receptive to you, and where are you spending the most time?
Well, the New England states probably the most receptive.
New Hampshire?
New Hampshire, Mass, Vermont, all 6 of them. Then I'm going to spend some time in the sort of libertarian-leaning states out left, which include California, a state that has nothing in common with Donald Trump, plus Oregon, Washington, Alaska. Those are libertarian-leaning states and closer to my brand, which is fiscal conservative, socially open, welcoming, supportive. And then the Mid-Atlantic, I'm a native of New York, and I've spent a ton of time in New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland. That would be the next step, and the Rust Belt states would be at the end.
It's interesting that you talk about crossover voting and out-of-party voting. I mean, that was actually where Donald Trump was strong in the Republican primaries. Donald Trump did much better, especially early on, in those primaries where you had crossover voting, where you had a lot of Democrats voting. I mean, how can, but still, I mean, you are running for the Republican nomination. I mean, what is going to be your pitch to the Republican voter who's maybe, a little bit uncomfortable with, say, Trump's tweets or has some objections to the president's tone, but then fundamentally says, I like his judges, I like the judges he's nominated, I like the tax cuts. I mean, what is your pitch to that voter?
My pitch there is my record. I was rated the most fiscally conservative governor in the United States when I was in office. That's a big start for a Republican. A lot of Republicans do care about the trillion-dollar deficits. And I have a long record on education, on the future of work, creative measures to privatize sectors of the state budget so you get more bang for your buck. That's going to appeal to Republican voters. The gamble is that Republican voters will agree with me that climate and environment are an important issue. If they don't, that's bad news for me. But for example, today I'm on a forum with a whole bunch of the Democratic presidential candidates, plus me, about climate change in Georgetown University here in Washington.
And what is your message going to be there?
My message is that, I love all my Democratic colleagues, but their plans are all about inputs. $1 trillion for this, $1 trillion for that. And what you got to do is measure the outcome. What we have to do is keep Earth temperatures from rising more than 1.5 degrees between now and 2050. And the way you do that is by putting a price on carbon, an upstream price at the wellhead, at the mine shaft. And then people can make their own decisions about how much carbon they want to emit into the atmosphere, and that price will probably settle around $40 or $50 a ton. It's not a command and control situation. We're not telling people what to do. They make their own decisions, and that's letting the market decide about carbon. That's a much more powerful engine than just saying, I'm going to spend $10 trillion to promote clean energy. You don't know if you're going to get there.
So the Libertarians seem to be, in some ways, even though the Libertarian Party, as I said, had a good showing for the Libertarian Party, the Libertarian ideas seem to be in recession, both, I would say, in the Democratic Party and in the Republican Party. And in fact, some surveys, long-term surveys, show that there are a lot more voters, in terms of crossover voters, there's a lot more voters who are fiscally liberal and socially conservative than the other way around. Do you think that this kind of socially liberal, fiscally conservative, libertarian message that you're running with, how do you plan to broaden that out beyond? Because it seems to be very, very popular among sort of, again, green rooms and certain elite circles, but I'm not convinced there are enough voters there to win the election.
It's very popular among millennials and moderate Republicans, of whom there are a lot in New Hampshire. People come up to me and say, thank goodness you're the guy who wants the government out of our pocketbook and out of our bedroom. So I'm not sure, Inez, that I would buy your premise there that libertarian ideas are in recession. I find them in full throat. We had an event in Washington last night, very good spirit. And I won't put a capital L on it, but it is fiscally conservative, caring about the deficit, because the millennials are going to wear that one like a badge, meaning in a negative sense, and climate change and the polar ice cap melting, the millennials are going to wear that one too. So I think I can make a strong argument that it's generationally unfair to younger voters to keep on the path we're on with these trillion-dollar deficits and with the national program for climate change being hoax. No one thinks it's a hoax except for Donald J. Trump. No one.
So when you are in New Hampshire, when you're going around California, Iowa, wherever you are, what is the top question that you're getting asked? What do people want to know from you? And what are are there any issues that are bubbling up that maybe the national press isn't paying attention to?
Well, I know no one in Washington cares about the deficit, but people do care about the spending. I remember when the Tea Party came in 2010, I was campaigning with Scott Brown, who won the so-called Kennedy seat in Massachusetts that year.
I was running for Congress that year, I remember it quite well. Great year to run as a Democrat.
Yeah, right. Well, try running for federal office in Massachusetts as a Republican in a presidential year. Not so good.
Yeah.
But it was spending fatigue on the street. And I get spending fatigue today, and I've seen it before. I saw it in 2010. So I get that one, but the overriding question that I get is, when's it going to be over? When are we not going to all feel exhausted? People feel exhausted in this country, and I think it's the result of the president's effort to be divisive, which he thinks is in his political interest, to have everybody shooting at each other. Listen, we got enough of that in Washington with the R's and the D's already. We've already had one civil war. It was quite enough.
Governor Weld, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for running. It takes a lot of courage to step out there.
Doesn't take any courage from me.
Appreciate
it's my
you being
pea
here.
patch.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Ina.
Next on Rising, the Working Families Party got their progressive credentials called into question when the group's 2020 endorsement switched gears from Bernie Sanders to Elizabeth Warren.
The organization's national director, Maurice Mitchell, explains how this happened and his thoughts overall in 2020 next.